Just one last minute request. Please put yourself on mute when you're not talking. Thank you.
I see. 君が喋らないときはミュートにしといてくれって。
Recording in progress.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today and welcome to the panel on Asia's transformation session. Without any further ado, please welcome our chair, Mr. Andrew Sheng. To open the session, Mr. Andrew Sheng, the screen is yours.
Selamat pagi, selamat sejahtera, good morning, good evening, good health to everybody. Welcome to this wonderful International Economic Association Online World Congress. My name is Andrew Sheng, and it's my pleasure and honor to chair this wonderful panel on Asia's transformation. To start, let me just say a few things. This panel is for 1 hour, and all participants who want to ask questions, please put into the chat function. Okay, I will pick the Q&A from the chat function. Now, we have a stellar panel. There's no other word for this, okay? To start off with, we will have Dr. Marie Pangestu, who is the Managing Director of the World Bank. She's in charge of all the research and the global practice. She was Minister of Trade and Minister of Tourism and Creative Economy in Indonesia. Superb policy and academic background. Second, we will have Mr. Yen. He's actually Dr. Eisuki Sakakibara, who is currently president of the Institute for the Indian Economic Studies. He was former professor at Keio University, and he handled the Asian financial crisis as Vice Minister for International Affairs in the Ministry of Finance, Japan. Then thirdly, we have Professor Jayati Ghosh at the University of Massachusetts. She has a distinguished career as a chair professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. And then we have Professor Danny Quah, Dean and Lee Ka-shing Professor of Economics at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore. Before that, he was Chair Professor of Economics at London School of Economics. So wonderful, welcome everybody. We will now start. Marie, over to you. 5 minutes.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Andrew. Selamat pagi, good day to everyone. It's a great pleasure to be on this virtual panel. I think everybody has recognized how East Asia has really been one of the beacons in terms of development and how they've been able to grow through in the last 3 decades through a combination of good policies, trade and investment, driven global value chains and so on, and how it's achieved it at the same time reducing extreme poverty, but hundreds of millions of reduction in poverty as well as improvement in human capital. So I won't go into that because the question here that we're being asked is the transformation of East Asia moving forward. And we can't do that without, of course, providing the setting of COVID and climate, I would say. There's 2 crises that the world and developing countries and East Asia are facing. One is COVID. So the development challenges have been accentuated because of COVID. And if you look at the rebound of the world economy, It's the fastest compared to any other global recession, but it's been uneven, with East Asia rebounding the quickest, and with some economies like China and Vietnam even experiencing higher per capita income this year, but others not so. So the other thing I would mention is that there has been recovery in trade in goods. This is different from the global financial crisis, but again, it's been uneven, with East Asia because of its integration with global value chains recovering more quickly. And another interesting number or observation is that trade in services still collapsed because of tourism and travel having collapsed. But modern services like business services, telecommunication services, digital-based services actually went up. And a number of East Asia countries, again, have benefited from this. So just to give you that as context. So what is the East Asia transformation that is needed to ensure the principles of equity, sustainability, and prosperity, which is the theme of this Congress? How do we move forward? Let me just frame it with something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue. You know, like the West, it's more a Western saying about brides. So something old, I think what has made East Asia successful in the past, trade and investment openness, sound policies that make markets work, and private sector as the engine for growth, investments, and so on. I think that still applies. But this time we are thinking about how the GVCs are going to be evolving with diversification within them, as well as, I would say, servicification, and how we need still the conducive environment. I think one of the success story of East Asia is that it was done, the last 3 decades, minus, I would say, the last 5 years, has been under a relatively conducive environment where you have, a relatively open rules-based trading system. But now, moving forward, we need to, since we have the return of multilateralism, how do we foster continued rules-based trading system, including in new areas such as e-commerce and data, and regional integration, which has been rather a stalwart of East Asia success. How do we go deeper, broader in that? The role of RCEP combined with CPTPP and so on. Something borrowed, I think, is how to deepen technology adoption and innovation in the region, just like advanced countries. Prior to the pandemic and in the years after the global financial crisis, we saw slowdown in productivity as well as in East Asia. And our Business Pulse surveys are also showing that more productive firms were able to respond to COVID shock better because they adopted digital technology. So the importance of innovation. Our latest report on innovation in East Asia show that all countries except China innovated less than expected given per capita income, and were operating below the technology frontier. So I think this will be another important area for the transformation. Finally, something new and not blue but green. How do we have a sustainable or green, resilient and inclusive recovery and growth? This is new because you are going to look at green, resiliency, and inclusiveness in an integrated way, not separately as we had done in the past. Green because the region includes the major emitters, and its continued development will have climate change impact, and climate change will impact on its growth. So your future competitiveness is going to be defined by how you manage this. And sustainable supply chains are also going to be defining competitiveness in the future. And transition of the major systems such as energy, transportation, urban infrastructure, food and land use, and manufacturing are both going to offer opportunities for new jobs, new sectors, technology and innovation, as well as addressing climate. Resilience, because you really need to be resilient to shocks, economic, health, climate-related, and natural disasters. Here is where diversification, continued openness, and upgrading your social protection schemes and SMEs, I think that's going to be a key. And finally, inclusiveness. as a Minister of Trade, I always said I'm a trade and development minister, not just a trade minister, but it has always, it's kind of a bit of an elusive goal because the gains from trade have not been equally distributed, and we all recognize that. So, and that has been part of the pushback against globalization and so on. So I think the big challenge is how to make sure that we distribute the gains from trade with really focusing on the complementary policies such as labor mobility, skills development, and gender equality. I'll end on that note. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Marie. That is a wonderful overview of the challenges faced by Asia in its transformation in the years to come. Something borrowed, something old, something new, and something green. Very important. Essentially, inclusive growth, inclusive development rather, green development, jobs, and innovation, without which we won't be able to transform. And now we have pleasure to invite Eisuki Sakakibara, former Minister of Vice Minister of Finance in Japan, to talk about his overview of how Asia will transform.
Well, the year 2021 would be the year of a strong recovery for the Asian economies. According to the World's Economic Outlook by IMF, China is expected to grow at 8.4% in 2021, which is the highest since 2011. And it seems to indicate the robust recovery of the economy. As is well known, China has been the highest growing country among countries with population of more than 1 billion. And China's growth rate during the past 10 years has been 6.8% annually. But even compared with the past average, 8.4%, which is expected in 2021, is very high. Thus, it is safely said that East Asia, including Japan, would recover quite strongly in 2021. Japanese growth rate is expected to be 3.3, which is, compared to the past average of 1%, is relatively high growth rate. India, according to IMF, would grow at 12.55% in 2021. It is the highest growing sort of country in Asia. Since the Indian GDP is only 18% of the Chinese GDP, Indian growth rate would continue to be high if the economy is managed well. Although there has been some negative historical legacies between China and Japan, Japanese-Indian diplomatic relationship has been quite smooth, and India has been a good friendly partner of Japan. Between the two countries, prime ministers visit the other country alternatively each year. It could be said that Japan and India has become genuine ally today. Major reasons for the good diplomatic relationship dates back to the Second World War period, when Japan assisted independence of Asia. As is well known, Japan at that time was waging war with allied forces, including USA and the United Kingdom. Under such context, Japanese helped India to fight against the UK to gain the independence. Chandra Bose, the leader of Indian independence, came to Japan to obtain the Japanese help for the independence. After meeting with Hideki Tojo, he obtained the Japanese military assistance for the independence. The Japanese military accordingly started the so-called Impala operation with Indian People's Army, led by Chandra Bose. Unfortunately, they suffered devastating defeat, losing more than 50,000 soldiers. And it is now thought to be the worst operation in Japanese war operation. Despite the defeat, the subsequent death of Chandra Bose by the airplane accident, however, the Impala operation is recognized by the subsequent Indian government as a Japanese contribution to the Indian independence, and many Indian prime ministers has visited Leng Kokuji temple, where Chandra Bose is buried. Chandra Bose is still very popular in India, and the airport in Kolkata is named after him as the Chandra Bose International Airport. Also, his residence in Kolkata is now open as a memorial home. Also, current Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has given the highest order decoration to Chandra Bose. Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eisuki. For particularly also introducing economic history into this perspective. You won't be able to understand Asia's future without understanding some of its past. And since you focus on India, let me also invite Jayati to speak about her perspectives on Asia's transformation. Jayati?
Thank you so much, Andrew. And it's really a privilege to be with such a distinguished panel. You know, it's also a little depressing, let me confess, to be on a panel with people from East and Southeast Asia, because South Asia's trajectory is really not as inspiring, or unfortunately as the future doesn't look quite as bright in the same way. Let me be honest. Essentially because one of the critical features of Asia, I think there was a report, an ADB report recently that pointed out there's no such thing as an Asian consensus. And that is very much the case because really there is such a variation in terms of trajectories and economic strategies across the region. And even within South Asia, we have huge differences. But it is fair to say that in South Asia, the development project is not just far from complete, but way less developed than even in Southeast Asia and certainly East Asia. And in particular, we still have a predominance of what I would call the lack of structural transformation. Bangladesh is the only major economy in the region that has shown a significant industrialization based, as we all know, on the garment industry. But elsewhere in the region, we really have stalled industrialization, particularly in the largest economy, India. Sakakibara-san mentioned that the 12.5% expected rate of growth of India in 2021, that's been revised downwards. It's now 7.7, which really means we will not be back to the level of GDP that was existing before the pandemic. It's basically, and that too is actually under threat because of the nature of the new waves of the pandemic, which are hitting the economy. It's not just that we've got inadequate structural transformation with the predominance of informal workers. Most 90% of our workers are informal across the region, but also that the pandemic has exposed significant weaknesses. I think Marie mentioned the lack of resilience in many of our economies. And it's the fact that a health crisis can generate complete collapse of livelihoods is a very, very serious concern, and one that is all the more worrisome because we do not have adequate fiscal response. The South Asian region is one of the regions that has shown the lowest fiscal response in terms of the pandemic. And this in turn means that we are ill-equipped not only to deal with the health crisis and the resulting economic crisis, but also ill-equipped to deal with ongoing challenges like climate change, which are already affecting us. What we really need is a new strategy. If Asia, including this part, South Asia, is to be transformed, we need a new strategy. We need, I would argue, going on from what Marie said, we would need a multicolored global New Deal. Multicolored because, of course, yes, it has to be green. It has to recognize climate change, the damage to the environment. It has to be blue, recognizing water as a very, very major concern across the region and especially in South Asia. Recognizing, it has to be purple, recognizing the significance of the care economy and how we have underinvested in care, which has given us inequality, inadequate resilience, and impoverishment of our people. And it has to be red. It has to actually get rid of the obscene inequalities that have expanded dramatically over this pandemic. And let us just remind ourselves that this New Deal that we talk about It was based originally, the FDR New Deal, on a strategy of recovery based on massive public investments, of redistribution, based on significant changes in tax structures as well as in social provision, and in regulating capital markets, labor markets, environmental situations, etc. And we really need all of these in all of these multi-dimensional and multicolored ways if we are going to transform the South Asian region in the way that we all want to.
Thank you very much, Jayati, for this impassioned expression of what Asia needs to transform. You know, we really do need transformation across the board, right? In fact, you know, the old ideas that have carried us so well for so long is finding completely new challenges. As you say, the health is devastating the livelihoods. And I'm one who feels very strongly about the average numbers. The average numbers look fine, you know, we've recovered, but actually the bottom half of society who have to go out and meet the pandemic is worse off than ever. And very often, as you say, the fiscal side may not be reaching to them. And on this note, let me remind everybody, please put your questions into the chat box. And now we go to the last but not least the panelist, Danny Quah. Danny, floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrew. I hope everyone is hearing me okay on audio. It's a great pleasure and an honor indeed to be on this panel along with the rest of you. In the time that I've got, Andrew had actually posed some sharp questions for me. What confronts Asia's transformation post-pandemic? And he had asked me to focus in particular on East Asia and its relations globally. So in answering these questions, there are just a small number of points I want to make. The first is the future is digital and green. It's digital and green in exactly the sense that Marie and Jayati have articulated for you. But the other thing is the pandemic will still hang over everything. So in my discussion, the time that I have, I will think of these three keywords: pandemic, digital, and green. These are ideas that span across nations. No single economy, no matter how large, can impose their single preferred canvas over all of them without some form of explicit or implicit collaboration across nations. And it's that last bit that I want to focus on. When I was asked to concentrate my discussion on East Asia, of course, Asia, any part of Asia, is extremely complicated, nuanced, and different. But I'm going to try and think about Southeast Asia and China, Republic of Korea, and Japan as my principal areas of focus. And the 2 points that I want to make about East Asia in this global context, in terms of the recovery. The first is an internal domestic set of issues. The second is the external trade, international exchange, and geopolitical environment. So on the internal issue, I'm going to try and flash up a screen here on what I think of as the internal issue post-pandemic. This is a graph. Hang on a second. Okay. This is a graph that shows the performance of East Asia over the pandemic. The recovery remains delicate. This graph has two axes on it. On the horizontal axis, there is economic performance, a measure of how Asia's growth has been sustained. On the vertical axis, a measure of COVID performance, normalized so that going upwards, you have better COVID performance. The early stages of a pandemic were ones where a lot of East Asia managed remarkably well. I've indicated in this graph a number of countries, number of nations, China, Vietnam, Singapore, Thailand, all of which appear vertically high in this graph because actually the number of deaths per million were relatively small. Economic performance on the horizontal axis was diverse across Asia. So the story that's emerged about Asia recovering from the pandemic will have to take into account how recently COVID performance has actually been relatively good. Even India, on a per capita basis, until very, very recently, had done remarkably well compared to the average and compared in particular to those nations below that horizontal blue line, where deaths per million in the UK and the US exceeded 1,500. So going forwards, Asia's post-pandemic economic transformation will be a delicate balancing act. Will it continue to sustain relatively good post-pandemic performance even when vaccines have not been as pervasive? Or will it fall into the trap now that has emerged from the Delta variant? This structure colors everything, in my view, on Asia's economic transformation going forwards. The poverty picture that Andrew has referred to magnifies the lessons from this story. The infrastructure story, the physical Belt and Road kind of infrastructure has diminished into the background as we all had to deal with this pandemic situation, but has now resharpened into focus, has now come back into focus. And this leads me to my concluding part of the intervention, which is international relations and geopolitics. As infrastructure, the physical kind, becomes more into focus now, Asia, we're going to have to deal with two large stories: a China-driven Belt and Road Initiative versus the G7's B3W, Build Back Better World. And while in an ideal situation, being digital, being green, being post-pandemic means that all of us ought to be working together, unfortunately, the geopolitical situation going forwards is fraught. It is fraught because Southeast Asia, East Asia, outside of China, are being presented with two large systems: a system of a free and open Indo-Pacific and a system of a China-driven Belt and Road Initiative. And the way this narrative has gone puts for East Asia, China in one corner, Southeast Asia in another. China's growth and large markets are big attractions for the rest of East Asia, but the warning that we've been given from G7 and elsewhere in a free and open Indo-Pacific narrative is that Beijing is leveraging predatory economics to coerce other nations, while conversely, the free and open Indo-Pacific presents itself in terms of a clear choice between free and repressive visions of world order in the Indo-Pacific region. This last bit, the geopolitics bit, will figure prominently in how East Asia continues its transformation. Let me conclude. The current state of transformation in my assigned part of Asia, three keywords: digital, green, post-pandemic. These challenges are pan-nation. Internally, we've got a good handle on the COVID situation with some significant exceptions. But externally, we're facing an international environment fraught with geopolitical competition that's going to make ongoing transformation extremely difficult. Back to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Danny. That was brilliant. I like this, green, digital, and pandemic. Actually, you've repeated in a different order GDP, green, digital, and pandemic. But I love your chart, which basically shows if you don't control the COVID controls you. Okay. I mean, if you don't control the COVID, you have a flat performance. And if you control the COVID, you have a stellar performance, right? So this is one of the choices that we have. But the geopolitical one is absolutely the dominant uncertainty. The whole world is asked to choose, right? In that sense, do we go the G7 route or do we go the other route? Is the G7 route the only open and free one, and is the rest not open, not free? That itself is a debatable question. But it's a very good time for us within Asia to go back and very quickly, sum up this. So I'm going to go back to ask Marie and then Eisuki and Jayati to critique this very quickly, 2 minutes, and then we immediately go into the questions. I've only got one question so far in the chat group, so I'm giving the audience a bit more time to put in the questions. Marie?
Are you asking us to critique Danny? Was that the ask?
That's a bit unfair. Everybody ganging
Yes,
up on you.
I know.
No. Sorry, this is not a critique. It's basically, now that all four of you've heard each other, right? And we've
Okay.
Let's hear from you now, what we think should be the way forward for the Asian transformation. We've had a good stock take. We have now different views on, Jayati may be a little bit more concerned about Asia's transformation. Danny's posed various issues to this. And Eisuki talked about India, Japan, and actually hinted at the geopolitical issue. He didn't directly go into it. So I think it's a good time now for us to discuss this. Marie.
Okay. All right. I'll say two things because you only gave me 2 minutes. One is that, I think East Asia, including South Asia, need to come together in the sense that, you have the platforms there. You have RCEP. We are waiting for India to join. So I think Jayati was right in the sense that South Asia needs to undertake the reforms that are needed, and if the regional integration is strengthened and broadened, then South Asia should definitely be part of it. My second response is to Danny's point about the G7 and the Belt and Road. I think they are not necessarily competing yet because we are not clear actually what the G7 infrastructure deal is all about. There is no large amounts of money that are coming out yet, and BRI is also still ongoing. So I actually think what needs to happen is the countries, so East Asia, perhaps the countries in Asia need to actually set the standard. I want green and blue, resilient and inclusive development, and for that, the infrastructure or the investments that I need have these particular qualities. They have to be of the highest sustainability standards. They have to benefit my country, and they have to create jobs, etc., etc. So not just accept, but also be proactive. And a lot of that is also obviously needs us to work. This is what part of a lot of what the World Bank tries to do is to support countries come up with their long-term low-carbon development strategies that achieve all those things.
Thank you very much, Marie. That's very good. The whole issue is not about which ideology you choose, but really, does it fit the kind of a green or multicolored, inclusive development that we all wish for, right? It really is about delivery. It's not about theory. It's not about wishful thinking. It really is how to deliver. Eisuki, some response, please, on what you think so far.
Well, this G7 approach, that you've been talking about versus, Chinese path is somewhat in conflict. But I think, there are ways to resolve those differences between the two.
Thank you. Okay, Jayati?
Yeah, thank you so much. These were very, very interesting interventions. I want to pick up on one of the things Danny said. You know, the future is digital and green. And I think we have to remember that that also means that the pattern of industrialization, the path to, you know, the development process, the GVC-led manufacturing industrialization, that's really not available as a development strategy anymore for South Asia, for sure. So we really have to think of new ways. In other words, we have to transform our thinking in terms of what the state can do, also in terms of the particular path that will enable us to get higher value added activities and lift our people out of poverty. And that's a big challenge, but it really means that you cannot do this without very, very substantial state intervention. It otherwise would be more of the same, which is why I'm not so sure that necessarily joining RCEP would solve the problem for South Asia. We really have to think of a whole new way of recovery, which requires much more public investment in green activities, perhaps driven with central bank intervention and so on. We need much more employment generating activities, of which care is a very, very important area. Care and the creative industries will probably be the big employment generators of the future, but we therefore need a new model. It's not going to happen with the market-led processes. It's not going to happen even just with more integration. I think the geopolitics messes this up for sure, but it doesn't undo what governments can still do if they have sufficient changes with their domestic political economy. So I really think that one of the big challenges facing South Asia is that we can't do what East Asia did. We can't even do what Southeast Asia did. But we do have options that are available because of the new challenges, which also provide new opportunities. We are not taking them. And we're not taking them because we are terrified of more public spending. We are terrified of more state intervention. And that's where the big constraints of the past are still driving us. And that's unfortunate.
Thank you very much, Jayati. I really like your reframing all this. This is not just about globalization. It's about the localization. How do we internalize what we need to do at the local level? You know, that also fits in with the global agenda, right? I mean, you know, the past 40 years are all about globalization. Globalize, you'll be fine. As you say, you know, some of the choices now is not so clear now, you know, because the globalization is under contention also. Danny, your response.
Thank you, Andrew. Just two very quick points. Those were wonderful arguments that have been made. On Jayati, I might add one word to the discourse that we're having here, and that word is jobs. What you're really concerned about is how, you know, the deindustrialization, the traditional industrialization going on, moving towards low carbon consumption type activities, faces, you know, risks all of us moving into a deindustrialized, low manufacturing world. And historically, it's been manufacturing that's generated the jobs for Asia's transformation. So I think going forwards, what we need to think about is how digital and green can themselves ought to generate jobs. I mean, we have no objection to that, provided that we come up with the kinds of new, well-paying jobs for all of the hundreds of millions of people across Asia that they can readily take up. And I think we can think about digital and green technologies in that direction. And that I would place as a high priority for Asia's transformation, how we make digital and green generate jobs. My final point is on maybe a little bit of a response to Marie Pangestu on this. There is no reason why G7 and China need to be in contention. Asia needs a massive amount of infrastructure, much, much more than any public agency can provide. That we've got people rushing into that space ought to be a good thing. We celebrate that. We need to uphold that. We need to have all nations have agency on how that evolves. But what we cannot do so well with, if we are faced with a scaffolding where one system constantly talks about its being set up in opposition to counter another system. And that, unfortunately, is the way a lot of Western narrative has emerged. It demeans the very fine process of building infrastructure that will benefit people, that will generate jobs in Asia. I'm sorry, but that's how a lot of that narrative has come out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. That was excellent response. Okay, we've now stimulated quite a few number of questions, and I can't pick all of them. But let me start with the first one. Alex Go asked, has BRI really benefited Asia? Anybody who wants to respond amongst the panelists?
Well, let me have a quick response. I think it's quite difficult to say benefited or not benefited, because a lot of, what is actually BRI and what was actually lots of bilateral lending and bilateral investments in infrastructure from China is a little bit hard to separate, right? But if you take overall bilateral loans and investments into China, I think the jury's probably still out. But I do think there's probably been an improvement over time. I'm just taking Indonesian experience as an example. Some of the original investment, because China was also new to that in terms of investments in the coal-fired power plants. The first ones were still the quality, there was a quality issue, but the later ones obviously improved. And I think that, back to my earlier point and about the countries will need to have their own plan of how they want to develop their infrastructure, both on the transparency procurement side, as well as on the standards and the quality side, and ensuring that it creates jobs and is of the right in the right place and the right time. So I think that's exactly the journey Indonesia went through. If I can use Indonesia as an example, and I think maybe other countries are having the same experience, that we determine, okay, we want projects that will create multiplier effects, that will as much as possible use our people, our industries, and help develop our industries, and have the right level of environmental standards, and have transparency in the procurement, etc., etc. I think we need to determine that. And the final thing I would say is that some of these projects are also beginning to be what do you call it, co-join. There's examples of China Development Bank with JBIC, JBIC, where they have these 5 standards in place to co-work and co-join projects in Thailand, for instance. And I heard recently also where they have done it in other places. So I would say, hopefully moving forward, that the narrative that Danny was talking about is narrative, but the reality on the ground hopefully will be different.
Thank you. I want to use this opportunity to move on, because there are quite a number of questions. But feel free, any of the panelists, to answer this. Srinidhi, Kumar, and Yumi both asked essentially the same question, which was that what about the fiscal response of Asia? Other than Japan, which is amongst the rich countries, which can engage in QE, the other Asian economies don't have that fiscal space because they can't engage in QE. How would you respond to this? Because clearly, as everybody mentioned, you need to spend a lot on the ground, not just on infrastructure, but also in the health transformation. Eisuki, I would like you to start first, because you have the background from the Ministry of Finance.
Well, what exactly is your question? I couldn't quite get that.
The key question is, how can Asia get the fiscal space, to do all the spending on infrastructure and all the income job creation programs, transformation programs? Because most emerging markets don't have the QE capability. All right, they don't have the fiscal space. How would you think about this?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer. Yeah.
But would you give some advice on some of the emerging markets? Because clearly, the dilemma for emerging markets, if you engage too much fiscal printing or monetary printing, you get into a foreign exchange crisis. That's the That's the difference between the advanced countries and the emerging markets.
Mm-hmm.
How would you, as a former, Ministry of Finance guy, give some advice on this?
Well, fiscal sort of input, I think is possible, and you have to really engage in some kind of sort of fiscal stimulus from the government side, and that is what we've been doing, and I think emerging economies could do the same as well.
Okay, all right.
Andrew, can I jump in, Andrew?
Yes, Danny, please.
The fiscal space question.
Yeah.
This is a hugely important question. Thank you, Yumi, for this. I mean, my answer, my sort of reaction has a little bit of unfortunately, has a little bit of a flavor of trying to lock the stable after the horse has already run out. Because, Singapore's experience in this, I think, is instructive. Singapore has, over the last 5 decades, accumulated a significant amount of reserves. The reserves that are special case put aside. So we have high savings, basically. And over the course of the last 18 months, the finance minister dipped into these savings in 5 different budgets that were, properly extravagant, providing job support schemes, co-investment, keeping the economy ticking over. So Singapore was very lucky. What it did was it dipped into savings to create that fiscal space or countering the economic impact of the pandemic. Now, that does not help those who are caught in that situation without that savings. But the reason I'm saying this is that it gives all of us pause in thinking about what excess savings really means. For a lot of the last however many decades, Asia had been criticized for savings too much. We should be part of a global insurance scheme, and all of that was actually damaging to the globe. All our excess savings was damaging to the global economy. Well, actually, there are things known as common global shocks. And when common global shocks happen, no amount of global insurance is going to save us. Every nation does need to recalibrate what it thinks about its own trajectory of savings. And we need to re-examine the sort of international conventional wisdom on what excess savings really means. Because going forwards, we're going to be confronting a lot of these possible global disturbances. Back to you, please.
Yes,
Could I
Jayati,
come in on this, Andrew?
Please.
Yeah, thank you. Danny, you are right, but you're also, this is one of those situations in a world of mobile global capital, neither fear nor courage saves you, to quote T.S. Eliot. Essentially, look at the Indian case. India added to its reserves during the pandemic. We went from $450 billion to more than $600 billion. We added to our excess savings during the pandemic. The Indian government has not spent more in real terms in 2020 than it did in 2019. In other words, it's a negative fiscal stimulus, if you like. And why did they do that? Because tax revenues collapsed, obviously, when you have a lockdown and you stop people from earning their livelihoods and so on. So they were so worried about a large fiscal deficit affecting their credit rating and generating a capital flight, which may or may not be right. But the point is that fear stopped them from spending more. As long as you're in a world of such freely mobile capital and your markets are so financially integrated that you cannot control this, you are at the mercy of this. And I do believe that's a very significant reason why so many emerging markets are not spending more. In India's case, we don't have a current account deficit really at the moment. We don't have a large external debt. There's really nothing preventing us from drawing on central bank to spend more. And at the moment, we have 90% informal workers. We have people dying of starvation. We have a collapse in employment. We have people working at half the nominal wages they were earning before the pandemic. And yet we are not doing government spending. Now, it's true that some of this may well be completely wrong on the part of the Indian government, but there is a genuine fear of credit rating agencies and capital markets. And to do that, the only way that we can get back is to get back to capital management techniques that do not leave us at the mercy of these whims.
Thank you. That's an excellent intervention, Jayati. It really poses a very fundamental question. Asia is being the primary engine of growth. It has the highest savings, but it's in a liquidity trap. so much of that savings is actually going to financing the rich countries, who are the net borrowers, right? Of which the largest is the United States. And then the money is not coming back. So we have a global liquidity trap, right? Everything is trapped in the short end, and there's not enough to go to invest in the long end. And the fiscal position is such that if you follow the current fiscal stance that's recommended, you cannot spend when you're afraid of of the foreign exchange outflow situation. So all these are very important questions that Asia needs to ask and answer itself. Why isn't Asian savings going back towards investing back in Asia? Now, let me immediately go back to a question that Lisa Pertiwi has asked, which I think is very, very good, because every country has its own constraints. And so therefore, her question is, which sector has the most opportunity to save the economy of each country that has been discussed at this time? I think it's a very good question. Let any panelist respond.
Did you say sector? Which sector?
Yes, which sector? Which sector? If you had to choose a sector for, let's say, Indonesia, which sector would you say you want to do so? Obviously, each sector for every country is very different.
Yeah, that's what that's why it's difficult to answer, because it's difficult to know which sector in every country. But I would say in general, infrastructure would still be an important area for growth, but in a different way, right? It goes back to the transformation that needs to happen in each country to make them achieve both the climate, green and blue, and development goals, which includes the resilience and inclusiveness, job creation of jobs. I think that's really the future sources of growth, and they create new jobs, new sectors. And digital, actually, digital is underlying all that. You want to save energy, you will have a smart grid, right? So that there's a digital and innovation component across the board. And technology, it's investment, financing, technology, and innovation, which across the board. But I would focus on the transformative ones that will give you those goals. So I would pick energy, just because in our part of the world, that's really going to have the biggest impact, both on development and climate.
Jayati?
If I could add,
let Jayati first.
If I could add to the physical infrastructure, which is absolutely important, I agree with you.
Human capital, yes.
Digital, I would add social infrastructure. Because I think one thing that it's shown us, this pandemic, and in fact the other kinds of problems we are facing, is how much we underprovide care, and how much we take for granted the massive underpaid and unpaid care economy driven by women. So I think it's absolutely important to invest hugely in care as well. Care broadly defined, including the entire range of things, because we have a young population and aging populations. We have many new kinds of care activities. It's hugely employment generating, has massive multiplier effects, is one of these relational activities that is not undermined by technology, but assisted by technology and digital activities. So yes, physical and digital infrastructure, but social infrastructure dominantly in care. I think a huge amount of public investment in that is required.
Danny?
Thank you. If I may make three quick points in response to Lisa's excellent question. Rather than focus on which specific sector, one might think about what general lessons to take from this. I think we would all point at digital, we'd all point at services, but at a distance, we point at telemedicine, for instance. But certain industries that are, at the same time that we do all this, we also realize that we're in the midst of a technological revolution driven by AI and IR 4.0, and whatever we do going forwards in terms of our sectoral attention needs to pay mind to all of those transformations at the same time that we do on the pandemic. So what general lessons to take away from this? Keep your economies resilient. There are certain industries that are going to be critical to you if circumstances happen that the rest of the world shuts down. Don't turn your back on globalization, but keep some part of your economy to be critical and essential. And then my very final point is, all of this ought to be making us rethink our traditional understanding of individual freedoms and personal liberties relative to social responsibilities. I take that as my description of what Jayati said about governments taking care of their people. People need to take care of people. People need to take care of other people. There's got to be a limit to how much individuals push their understanding of liberties and personal freedoms over and above social responsibilities. I think part of a response that we're seeing across the world is that different nations have, for historical reasons, been able to respond differentially because their societies have different understanding of what social responsibilities mean among the people. Governments can only help that thinking. Governments cannot do everything for us. Back to you, please, Andrew.
Andrew, if I please,
yes,
Danny, yes, but you know,
yes,
I'm in India where governments are restricting freedoms. Across our region, we have governments restricting freedoms. Let's not go that route.
Okay, Eisuki, you have the last word on this one.
Well, I think, infrastructure investment is quite important as well, we have been emphasizing that. I think it is still true. Green and the blue revolution is here, but still, you have to sort of recognize that infrastructure investment is quite important as well.
Right. So, that's, I think, everybody, when they use the word infrastructure, they forget that they concentrate on hard infrastructure. What Jayati was really saying is the soft infrastructure, right? It's the software that ultimately determines whether the system is working or not. And we need to spend more time in this area. Everyone wants to build the bridges, and these are concrete. These we can feel and touch them. But actually, you discover that if the software doesn't work, the hardware doesn't work that well either. Now, so we have one other question, which unfortunately is country directed, is asking, what's the role of Australia in this? Since nobody here is from Australia, I don't know how to answer that particular question. Anybody who want to say, what can Australia contribute to this Asian transformation? No.
As a nominal Australian,
yes.
I will say that from the long time ago, from Paul Keating, right? Australia is part of Asia.
Yes.
And so Australia should really be looking at not just, they have tended to look more beyond Southeast Asia. They really need to be more integrated with the whole of Asia, and with RCEP and many other integration schemes, they can really play a big role. And I do think especially in many areas, in services, for instance, they can play a big role.
Good. All right. We're running out of time. So very quick responses from the four panelists. What you want to just your final messages, please. Marie?
What's the order? You want to use the same order as
same order.
Okay. For me, for green and blue, resilient and inclusive development, we need to invest in all types of capital: physical, financial, human, social, and natural capital. And these investments will need financing as well as technology and innovation.
Good. Eisuki?
Well, green and blue innovation is very important, but as I emphasized, infrastructure investment is still very important to support all the economy.
Good. Jayati?
Yes, green, blue, purple, red, maybe other colors as well, but we have to think different. We have to think big.
Very good. Okay, Danny?
Andrew, I'm going to repeat what you said to me, which is GDP. Green digital post-pandemic, with an eye paid very closely on geopolitical evolution.
Yeah, thank you very much, Danny. This is, time's run out, so we could have gone on for another hour at least on this wonderful topic. And the range has been very wide, but clearly Asia's transformation will need very much more conversation amongst all of us. And I want to thank, firstly, the audience for listening. But I think you would agree that this four panelists have been four issues that I think immediately come around. Number one, I would say, this panel is very wise, right? It's lots of rich wisdom. Number two, it's not just brilliant. Actually, it's more important than brilliance. It's illuminating. They have sparked many ideas that we should now have a discussion over what we need to do. But thirdly, this panel is very Asian. It's passionate. It really needs to, get across that, we have a lot of things to deal with. But finally, I think, this comes back to economics as a moral science. It's all about morality. Okay, we cannot talk about just growth or development without understanding the moral issues of how many people are suffering during this COVID. So we need to conquer the COVID, and hopefully we can manage it, but we certainly will have to live with it. So on that note, let me thank the panelists, and thank all the audience, and thank the organizers, the International Economic Association, Andrea, and all the people who have made this virtual event possible. On that note, thank you very much indeed. Salam sejahtera. Then keep safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.